Now, are you happy to be weak? Have you learned that power is perfected in weakness? Or are you still running from your weakness? Weakness is your greatest friend. And one of the greatest problems we have in Christianity today is people don't turn around and embrace their weakness. They don't love it. My youngest son has had trouble reading his whole life. And we've barely been encouraged this year. He's just got one more year of school left, but he has been able to read some simple sentences. And I came home this summer, and Betty said to me, "You don't want to see Noah?" And I said, "Why?" And she said, "He went to take his driver's test." I said, "What happened?" She said, "He flunked it." She said, "You don't even want to see him." I went downstairs and went in his bedroom, and there he was on the floor, kicking, throwing things, bawling, mad. Why did God make me this way? Why did he do that? I wish I was just dead. Why did God do that? I can't read. I never have been able to read. I'm going to be stupid my whole life. I'm never going to get anywhere. And then all the things were going, and he told me to get out of the room. So I got down on the floor right next to him, and I got in his face, and I said, "Get up, man. Get up." And he said, "Get out. Get out." And I said, "Hang on." I said, "Get up, man." And he got up on his knees, and I said, "Get up." And he got up, and I said, "Get in the car." And he said, "Why?" And I said, "Listen, I'm the one asking the questions and giving the answers right now, not you. In the car." So he stomped off, slamming the doors, all that. Got in the car and got in. Then I got in the car with him. And I said, "Listen, mate, enough whinging about how God has made you. You have not embraced your weakness. Why haven't you ever turned around and grabbed that weakness and held on to it and said, power will be perfected in it? It is your weakness. So what? And who are you, the clay, to say to the potter, I don't like the way you made me? So we're not going anywhere until you thank God for your weakness. And you tell him you're happy he made you that way. You wouldn't want to be any other way. You're thrilled with it. And so he did, and I said, now, here's where we're headed. We're going back to the driver's license place. They give the test 5 more times today. So you can flunk it 5 times. In between each time, we'll go over to the restaurant, and we'll read the book again, and we'll go back. They're giving it to him on tapes. And they give it 8 times Thursday, 8 times Friday, and 40 times next week. I don't know when we'll get done with it, but we'll get done. Very few people succeed the first time. I said, let's get on with it. So we headed over there, and he passed it that next time. It was interesting that a friend of ours was passing through that knows Ray and I, and he came through, and he'd never met my son, didn't know a thing about my son. And he's got a lot of favor with men. He's a real gentle guy. And it was interesting, I asked this fellow, I said, he's an elderly man, would you pray for Noah before you leave? And he said, yeah, I'll pray for him. And he put his hands on him. Noah was heading out the door to go to work. And the fellow knew nothing about him, knew nothing about my family, didn't know a thing. And he says, the Lord says, I've given you favor before men, but I've given you a weakness. So when you're lifted up, you'll never be exalted. There was Noah with a big smile. I said, how does that make you feel to be weak? And he said, great. I walked with him to the car, and he's mentioned it to me over and over again, the glory in being weak. Are you happy with that today? With whatever your weaknesses are? It's an interesting thing in that I travel all the time and I speak all the time, and I figured out last year I'd lectured nearly 500 hours. And every time I get ready to go out to lecture, I don't want to go. It's just a good thing I'm impulsive. And it's a good thing people call me up and say, would you come? And I go, yeah, I'll come. Because for the week before I go, I sit there and say, I don't want to be there. I don't want to talk. I don't have anything to say. Who do I think I am? I should just shut up. I shouldn't go there. The Australians have suffered enough at the hands of the Americans. Why go? Why do it? And I have to go, and my wife just laughs at me now because I'll go into depression every time before I leave town. Why did I do this? Why did I say I'm going? And she'll just start laughing. And what I'll have to do is turn around and embrace that weakness and hold on to it, and then his power comes out of it. So we're going to reveal some weaknesses to you. But as we reveal those, I don't want you to be undone over them. I want you to embrace them and to see that power can be perfected in those things. Now, when we look at self and the whole topic of self-life and what it is, I find that topic a bit confusing. Because on the one hand, there's heaps of books out there that says you ought to kill yourself. You need to be crucified with Christ. Get rid of self. It needs to go. Then there's a lot of them out there that talk about denying yourself. And then there's those books out there that say you have to love yourself. Well, what are you supposed to do with it? Kill it, deny it, or love it? And what really the Bible's talking about is three different selves, and that's what I want to do briefly with you this morning. And I'm going to cover it quickly. If you want to get more information on it, then Ray did 4 sessions on that are here at Capernwray that you can pick up. But let's just look for a minute at the self that I want you to love, and I'm going to give you a little test here before we're done, so you'll know what yours is. 1 Thessalonians 5:23. Well, hang on. I just thought maybe y'all needed glasses. Is that better? Okay, in 1 Thessalonians 5:23, Paul talks about the spirit and the soul and the body. And I believe that he makes those simple distinctions so we can understand man. Some people disagree with 3-part. They use 2-part. We can teach it either way. But basically what we want to look at is how are we made. And so God made you out of the dust of the earth. He breathed his spirit, and you became a living soul with a mind, a will, and an emotions. The soul is the place of your personality, or we call it the unique self. God isn't in the cookie-cutting business. So he didn't make all of us exactly alike. He made each one of us individuals. It's like a prism. Every prism does the same thing. It receives light and displays it, but every prism displays it differently. You're just like a prism. You were created to receive Christ's life and to display it, but to display it uniquely. So he's not in the cookie-cutting business. He hasn't made us all the same. And I think it's valuable to understand some of those differences. The personality of man is expressed through his mind, his will, and his emotions. Who you are is expressed through those 3 things. So what we do is we divide people into 3 categories. The doer, that's the strong-willed person. And you can equate that to the muscle. The more muscle you have, the more you can get your own way. All of us here have worked for doers. They're a lot of fun to work for. They let you have their way. And what they tell you is get in the wheelbarrow. They don't ask you, they tell you to get in. And they go marching off to the job, and halfway there they find a different one they'd rather do, and they dump it and head this way. And they just leave you there in a heap. Then there's people who are feelers. They cry in the fall when the leaves fall off the trees. It's so sad. They can just hardly stand it. They're just hurting all the time for those around them. And then you have the person, and the feeler would be like taste, touch, sight, sound. It'd be like the senses. It puts the body in touch with a world other than itself. And you'll see that feelers always do that for you. They put you in touch with a different world. Then you have the thinker. They're real analytical. They go to bed at night. Even though they're dead tired, they can't shut that little voice off that's going on inside their head. And they think and think and think and obsess on things. Now, Psalms 139 says this: You created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. He made you uniquely what you are. And the thing I want to emphasize this morning, first of all, is do you love who he's made you to be? Are you comfortable with it? The people that I enjoy being around the most are people that are comfortable with what they are. And I've been around some real oddballs. I remember Betty had a couple of friends at university. They invited us over to their house, and they were very eccentric. They had 13 cats and 6 dogs. It was a great meal. Between every other bite, you were doing this. Yeah, that's really good chicken. That stuff was everywhere. And this fellow had an old Volkswagen station wagon that he'd put 2 speakers on the front. And then he'd run around town with his microphone. And I'd be at a stoplight, and all of a sudden I'd hear this, Mike. And I'd look around, and there he'd be in a parking lot. Need to check that right rear tire. And I'd get out of the car in the light and kick the tire, and he'd say, "Clear to go." And he was always around town. I love that guy. He wasn't bothered by how eccentric he was, and I wasn't bothered. I love that kind of uniqueness. I'm really happy that forests don't only have one tree. I'm glad the world doesn't just have one tree. I like that variety in people, and yet people don't like it in themselves. Jesus said this, "I'm the way." Who does that appeal to? I'm the way. Doer. I'm the truth. Thinker. I'm the life. Feeler. He appeals to every one of us. Now, we're all blends of these things, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But I believe it's important for us to understand it, not to obsess on it, but to actually understand it. Your unique self. And here's one of the main reasons. When you look at another person's behavior, you judge that behavior by what you would be saying in the same behavior. So how accurate are you? Is it any wonder that Jesus says, "Do not judge"? Because when you judge, you'll get it wrong. You will always get it wrong. You're judging out of your own shoes. If you're married to a thinker, as I am, this is the look you're most accustomed to. Because if they pause for a minute, they go up here to the biggest playground in the world, and they just start playing up there. And if they're not interested in what you're saying, all of a sudden it's just this. I remember I had a physician and his wife over to eat dinner. And they were eating dinner talking to Betty and I, and all of a sudden I noticed the wife kept looking at the husband. And she kept looking over at him, and she kind of nudged him and kept looking. I thought, well, what's wrong with him? And I looked over, and Betty was sitting beside me just like this. Just about ready to drool. The conversation didn't interest her. She checked out of it. That was it. That was the end of it. So I get married, and I don't understand that. So what I do is I'm going down the road, and I'm telling Betty, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, want to be fun to do this, do that, we're on our honeymoon, we're going on. And I ask her a couple of questions, and she's looking straight ahead with that look. Now, when I don't talk to someone, that means I'm mad. When Betty's not talking, she's only thinking. So now, what do I assume about Betty? She's mad, and I am completely off. I'm wrong. Then the next thing I do is I punish her the way that would be most effective to punish me. I don't talk to her, which she enjoys. That didn't even work. I've told Betty, I said, you know, darling, I said, if you went to prison, it wouldn't even be punishment as long as everybody stayed out of your stuff. Stay in your own room, your own little place. It's important to understand it in relationships because we misjudge and we don't minister to people on the level they need ministering. We minister on our level and what we would do and what we would say and what would happen, but we don't know what they're like. And it's no big trick to find out what they're like. All I'm going to cover with you today are the things that every mother knows. As I said before, in the U.S., we love to study the obvious. Is any mother in this room didn't know that each kid was different? And they knew it nearly immediately? They could just tell right away. Now, personality, unique self, is like a hammer. It's not good or bad, it's how you use it. There's no negative thing in your personality. But who's got a charge of the hammer? If you kill a little old lady with a hammer, it's bad. If you build her a house, it's good. Thinkers are very critical. Is criticism bad? Don't we need people to sit in the church and say this? Hold on, I'm not going to vote for this until I get more facts. Hang on, I'm not going along with this teaching until I can investigate it. Is criticism wrong? But turn it on others and turn it on yourself, and it's terrible. Is it wrong to be subjective like a feeler? Here's what a feeler does. They walk down the street. Their best friend's on the phone. They just found out their mother died. The best friend comes walking past them, just staring, going along, in shock. They pass the feeler, and the feeler goes, oh my, what did I do? They don't say, what's wrong with them? What did I do? Oh, did they hear what I said? Did I do something to offend them? Have I done something wrong? And they just spiral into that subjectiveness. That's no good. But it is good to be subjective. When I had a fellow come into my office who for the last 10 years was a streetwalker, a male prostitute in Denver, and a drug addict. The 10 years before that, he was an Assembly of God pastor. He was completely wiped out. Family wouldn't answer phone calls. Nobody's living on the streets. And I looked at him and I said, you know, brother, you're struggling so much, I know God's going to walk you out of this. Let's get going. And I said, I'm going to tell you something. If he doesn't let you into heaven, he won't let me, because we're both going in the same way. The blood of Jesus. Let's go. Now, anybody else that knew him would have said I was nuts. But under the rule of the Spirit, that subjectiveness, that blame-taking, taking responsibility for where he's at, God used when he had a hold of it. And the guy walked out of it. So it's important to see what these differences are. Now, God doesn't show any partiality. And it's an interesting thing when you begin to look at unique self then. We come to understand that nobody is any better in the kingdom of God. God gives an equal amount, or I just call them units, of unique self to each person. The important thing is that he's in charge of that unique self. So you can have the person that has 8 units of the mind, and they're highly intellectual. And if you have a kid like that, doesn't Grandpa and Grandma really love to boast in them? Oh, they were reading when they were 3 years old. Oh, you can't believe how smart they are. They're just near genius. And they go on and on and on about it. Here's an interesting thing. I don't know if the survey's changed any. And it was talking about straight A students. But 80% of straight A students, and I think the figure was a little higher than that, grew up to work for a C or a D student. Isn't that interesting? Because the C or D students are normally the doers, and they can't relate to the academic environment that's dreamt up by a thinker. They just can't relate to it. They're more over here in the drive area. And if you've ever been around a doer, they see people as a tool. If you got a screwdriver and it breaks, what do? Throw it away. They use people, when they break, they throw them away. Paul says to John Mark, you're getting to be a hassle, get lost. You're broke. And Barnabas says, hang on. And Paul wouldn't even have a hearing if it wasn't for Barnabas. Hang on, I don't think he's a no-hoper. And Paul says, well, maybe you better go too. Don't get in my way. Doers are constantly marching into hell with a squirt gun, and they don't want anybody with them that isn't going to go. If you don't want to come along, just get out of the way. If you'll notice, Paul's personality never changed before conversion or after conversion, did it? He was the same guy. He was driven to persecute, and then he was driven to see people saved. But he was always a driven man. What he was didn't change. And then you have the person that can be more of, got off on that, more of the feeler over here. They care about others, think about others, and really put us in touch with others, as I mentioned before. Now, if you look at some of these distinctive characters, and I want to do that with you just so you see what I'm talking about and can enjoy it. One of the illustrations we use to describe the differences in those 3 personalities are those 3 people eating in a restaurant. So imagine that you have all 3 of these people in a restaurant, a thinker, a feeler, and a doer. And the 4th person gets a piece of lettuce stuck between their teeth. Here's what the thinker does. And here's what goes through their mind. Don't you see that lettuce is there? Don't you see how stupid you look? Can't you get that out of your teeth? Can't you feel it there? Would you please get it out? They can't go on. They can't even eat because something's out of place. And they're just obsessed with it, and it's driving them nuts. And of course, obsession is one of the biggest problems a thinker will ever have. And we talked about this last time. If you imagined that this whole room were your life, and everything in the room represented something of you, how many of you noticed this? Not too many of you, right? Doesn't take up much room in here. Not very many cubic centimeters. But as I move it towards me in obsession, it becomes this big. Now it becomes this, and I don't even know if I can go on. I can't stand it. I can't take it. I can't even see it. I keep tripping. And what we really need to do is to learn to throw it down. And a thinker has to learn with their mind at some point in time to say, I'm not going there anymore. Been there, done that, not going there anymore. Never did me any good to think about it for the last 15 years, so it's probably not going to do me any good to think about it for the next 15 years. I'm not going there anymore with my mind. Thinkers have sloppy minds for the most intelligent people in the world. They have the most brain power and the sloppiest minds of anybody I've ever met because they don't rule over it. It rules over them. And they need to say to it, I'm not going there, and just switch directions. Now, there's two ways to be obsessed on something. One is to say, I'm thinking about it. The other is to say, I'm not going to think about it. I'm not saying I want you to say I'm not going to think about it because you're still thinking about it. I want you to say I'm not going there anymore. But this thinker would be obsessed with this little bit of lettuce. I was flying one time from Johannesburg to, I was trying to get to Cairo on Tanzania Scareways. It's a great airline. They got 2 flights a day. You can pick the one you want. The seats weren't even bolted down. They rocked back and forth, and then as a bolt would come out, the guys would pick them up and put them in their pockets. The oxygen mask had been cut off, and all that hung down were the tubes. So anyway, this plane broke down, and we had to land in Nairobi. And so I went up to the ticket counter, and I said, look, I've got meetings. I've got to get on to Cairo. I said, when can I get there? And they said, well, we're hoping that we can have you there in 4 days. So I got busy trying to get tickets to get out of Africa. Now, any of you that have been there know what I'm talking about. You get in this line with 20 people, and you wait, and you wait, you wait, and then they say, go get in that line. So you go get in that line, and you wait, and you wait, and you wait, and you get to the front, and they say, you're in the right one over there. Okay, and you just do that. It took me over 20 hours to get these tickets. Well, I looked like somebody you'd drugged through a knothole backwards. I was a mess at that point. I hadn't slept. I was there 20 hours up getting the tickets. And there was only one other American in the whole place. Now tell me what personality he was. He had a perfectly pressed hat in this unbelievable heat, little feather on it. His shirt was pressed, had his buckle right about here. His pants were pressed, spit-shine cowboy boots. And then everything was in his pocket according to size. Passport, that was after the pocket protector with the pins. And they were all in order, size and all that. And he's got passport, boarding pass, tickets, all that right there in the line. Well, I'm standing there in line, and he keeps walking by me doing this. Then he goes on. Pretty soon he comes back. He goes on. This goes on for hours. Well, I'm thinking to myself, obviously this guy's a thinker, and a thinker hates the unknown, so he's getting rid of all the variables before he asks me a question. He's going to make sure it's all lined out before he says anything. He wants to know the end result before it happens. Finally, after several hours, he comes up to me and said, can you help me? I said, sure, and I'm thinking he needs money, a contact, doesn't know where to go, doesn't know how to get out, what to do, visas, something. I said, sure, mate, what do you need? You missed a belt loop, would you mind fixing it? I said, what? Yeah, you missed a belt loop, would you mind fixing it? And I reached around, I had. And I was so tired then, I said, well, no worries. And I took off my belt. I took it out, and he says, you know, you got your belt off, it wouldn't hurt any to tuck in that shirt. I tucked it in, and I put my belt on. I said, how am I doing? He said, fine, and he went on. But see, for a thinker, you're an extension of them. You're always an extension of them. They want to control you because you represent them. I'm the only other American there, and I'm ugly. And he can't stand that, and so he wants to control it. The feeler looks up at the lettuce, and they see it, and they're so embarrassed for this person. Oh, look at how the thinker's looking at him. Oh, my, this is terrible, it's terrible. They look so stupid and everyone's staring at them. Maybe I should say something, but what if I do and they don't like me? But what if I don't and they knew I did know and now they don't like me either? I just don't know what to do. They're just a mess. The doer's the most fun. He looks up eating, sees it, reaches in, gets his buck knife and digs it out. And of course, when he digs it out, he cuts you clear down to here. And you start bleeding, and he says, shut up, that's why they made Band-Aids. If you have a father that's a doer, it is a frightening thing. My dad's a doer. And one morning he sent me downstairs. I was about 16, and he said, would you get the milk out of the refrigerator in the basement? And it came in little glass jars back then. So I went down and I got the milk, and I was running up the stairs. I fell forward and the glass broke, and then I slid down the glass. So I came upstairs. I mean, I looked there before I went upstairs, and right here in my elbow was a piece of meat sticking out about the size of my thumb. And I looked at that and I thought, man, I don't want him seeing that. He's off the farm too. You don't ever want to show a farmer something like that. You just don't. And I put my hand up against it like this, and I went racing through the room, and the blood was running out of the bottom of my hand. And he said, hey, stop. What's going on? What's going on? Stop. And I looked at it, and it was so ugly, I thought, hey, he's going to see that. Doctor, no school, might be able to stretch it out for 2 days. Stitches? Yeah, it's all right. I said, yeah, look at that. And he says, man, that's ugly. That big old thing sticking out there. I said, I know. He said, you know, I read somewhere if you just cut that off, it won't scar. I said, you what? And by then, he'd spun around with my mother's kitchen shears and grabbed my elbow and snipped that off. And I went down into the chair. There was a chair there, and I just went back into it like that. Now, the nice thing about having a dad that's a doer, he's too busy to see the outcome. He heads on out the door, and as I'm coming to, he says, you might want to slap something on that. So I go put a Band-Aid on that thing. I couldn't believe it. A few years ago, I was traveling with my father in Argentina, and we were eating dinner. And he's eating, and all of a sudden he stops and he says, man, that's an ugly scar on your elbow. I said, I'm glad you mentioned that. I said, you don't happen to remember how that happened, do you? And he said, what? And I said, I fell on that glass and cut my arm, and I walked past you. And you said, yeah, if we cut that off, it won't scar. He said, didn't work, did it? It didn't bother him any. Do you know, though, I like that about doers in terms of being able to march into things. And they'll go, you see Paul who's stoned and left for dead, and they pray for him, and he comes back to life, and he says, hey, things are looking up. Got a response. They want a reaction, and then they think things are really moving and really happening. If you're on the Titanic and it's sinking, who do you want with you? A doer, because a doer will say this to you. Give me your belts, grab those pieces of wood that are floating around, those crates, strap them together, hold on, and we'll jump off. Hey, it's a plan. But the thinker stands there and says, I'm not going to go down without my pants. I'd rather die here than not have my pants. He won't give them to you. The feeler walks up to you as you're dying, and he puts his arm around you and says, starts bawling. Mike, it's a shame you're never going to see your wife and 3 kids again. They don't have a plan. They just care for you. They just empathize. If you have to go get immunization shots, and you can go Monday through Friday, when does the thinker go? Friday, to see if anybody dies from those. They're not going to jump into anything. The doer shows up just as the door's closing on Friday, and just as they close the door, he puts his foot in the door and jumps in, and the nurse says, I'm sorry, we're closed, and he just yanks one off the tray and just gives it to himself and throws it at him. It's fun to watch a feeler get a shot. A feeler gets a shot, and they always look away because feelers hate pain. They'll do anything to avoid pain. They just always have to stand back here. My boys won't go to the bank with me anymore because I park in the president's spot. And it just makes my sons a nervous wreck. You're in the president's spot. I wouldn't even have it if we didn't bank here. Let's get on with it. I like doers. They park in handicap spots and say, let them crawl in. It'll be like a job. I was up at our men's retreat that Ray speaks at every year in the mountains. We went four-wheeling up in the mountains. And we got ready to eat and set out the picnic table, but we didn't have any napkins, any serviettes. So I said, well, that's not a worry. I brought toilet paper. So I had the toilet paper there on my finger, and these guys could go by and get their food, and then they could grab some for a napkin, for a serviette. And it was really interesting to watch the different guys. The thinkers came up there and peeled each little square off and took a little pot. And you're thinking to yourself, how do they... Never mind. But they get all of this stacked up just right, so it's perfect. It's like they're going to use both sides. And then the feelers come up, and they're a lot of fun. Tim, our music leader, he grabs it. You know, Mike, there's another time I was up in the mountains where they didn't have anything to use, and he's just going like this, and he just leaves with this thing on his hand. The doers are fun. They just walk up to you and go, thanks. Just take it and go. It's interesting, too, to look at the humor of some of these people. A feeler's humor, they can tell a great story. There was an Irishman. He was a burglar from Ballymena. He went in the house late one night. He had a flashlight in his mouth. He's going through the drawers. He's getting all the jewelry. He's doing whatever he can to take it, and all of a sudden he hears a voice. Jesus is watching you. And he looks all around with his light in his mouth, and he doesn't see anyone, so he keeps pinching the jewelry and everything he can get. Pretty soon he hears another voice. Jesus is watching you. And he takes his light and he shines it all around the room, and up in the corner is a parrot. And he's on a little stick. And he said, did you say that? And the parrot said, yeah. And he says, well, what's your name? And the parrot said, Moses. And the Irishman says, what kind of an idiot would name a parrot Moses? And the parrot said, the same kind of idiot that named his Doberman Jesus. But a thinker's humor is totally different than that. And if you get into a thinker's head and their humor, it is very, very funny because it is so dry and so cutting. I was sitting with Zeb one day on my middle son, sitting with him on the divan watching TV. And I looked over at him, and my other two kids are just clones of their mother. And I looked at him and I said, you know, you look the most like me of any of the other kids. He never even looked over to me, never said a word. He just kept watching TV and said, I guess that means I got to start working out. That's all he said. Ray and I came back from a meeting that we held one day, and Ray was saying, I really think the message got through. I think those people caught on. And I said, brother, let me introduce you to a couple of terms. Neurotic and psychotic. I said, a neurotic person builds castles in the sky, and a psychotic person moves in. I said, if you think everybody got ministered to by your message, I think you've gone psychotic on me. I think you've moved in. He never said a word. He just sat there for a while eating and looked up and said, well, at least I got you as a neighbor. If two thinkers are married together, here's how their conversations go. You want to go out and eat? I don't know. Do you? I don't know. Well, do you want to go and eat? I don't know. Well, let's go eat. Okay. Where do you want to go? I don't know. Well, what do you want to eat? I don't know. You want to go to the movie afterwards? I don't know. And then thinkers like to keep lists. So if you're married to a thinker, then what they'll finally say to you is, because a thinker blows up, they don't have the luxury of daily explosions. They blow up over 6 months, 6 years worth of stuff. So when they blow a gasket, they blow over years of things. And they bring out the list on how you've never let them choose where they want to eat. I remember telling Betty one day, she was chopping carrots for Thanksgiving. And I always liked it when I was in management, production management, because you watch others work. So you watch them do all the work. That's a lot of fun. And you tell them how to do it faster. So I said, Betty, you know there's a faster way to chop carrots? Mr. Advice. Well, that does it. You don't happen to remember 1975 at my mother's house. Now, I can promise you I did it in 1975. When you told me that I didn't know how to chop carrots? Do you remember in 83 at your grandmother's? Do you remember in 89 at your grandmother's? No. Well, I marked it then. If it ever happened again, we were going to bring this to an end. I know how to chop carrots. Because for a thinker, their task equals their identity. You don't separate what you do from who you are. You're just tied up, and you're a great employee. I love to work with thinkers because there's a little bit of them in everything they do, and you know it's really going to be done well. But at some point, you have to separate task from who you are. I'm the opposite. I go out and Betty says, "Would you please trim the bushes?" Now, you said you were going to do that the last 5 springs. I said, "Yeah, it's time I go do that." So I get out with my shears and I'm whacking away at them and talking to all the neighbors and waving at people. People are pulling up in the car and we're talking. We're having a great time whacking away at this stuff. And then I go into my garage. Ray's seen it. I've got a certain pile that I know that ought to go in, and I stand back and fling it in. See, I'm not like you thinkers with the baby food jars screwed up on the wood, where everything, all my screws are in one big bucket where I can dump them out and get to them. I like to see what I own in all one pile. And then Betty comes out to me and she says, "You didn't do a very good job on the bushes." I said, "Yeah, you should have seen them before I started." That doesn't bother me. Close is good enough. But if she tells me you've hurt the kids' feelings and you said something really rude, then I am affected by that. That really does impact me. If you got 2 feelers married together, never try to call them. They're not at home. If you do try to call them, the phone's tied up. They're busy. They're talking and finding out about others. If you got 2 doers married together, every year give them dishes. There's nothing a doer enjoys better than a good fight. They enjoy conflict. Now, if you want to control a doer, here's what you do. They get their identity through the task they've dreamed up, this big thing. Let them tell you all about it. Let them tell you what they're going to do. Let them tell you what you're going to be doing. Of course, you'll be doing all the work. And they'll tell you all of that, and when they get all done, go, "Do you have any Lemingtons?" And they'll go mad. Because you've got to get worked up with them. You've got to get enthusiastic with them and move ahead. You really control them. And I'll tell you this, in discipling people, you need to disciple people according to their personality and relate to them that way. A thinker does not have a hard heart. Do you know, I don't know anyone yet that I've ever talked to that went into their marriage hoping that it would end up the way it is 10 years later. People do not drive around in their cars making lists. "Oh, this will drive Betty crazy. Yeah, this will push her over the edge. This worked last year, and I'm not driving along in the car doing that." And Betty isn't driving along in the car doing that or walking around the house making a list of what will drive me mad. We ought to disciple people out of their personalities and see how they want to do it. People's hearts aren't hard, but when you tell a thinker what to do, they want to know how to do it. A feeler just races off. A doer wants to tell you how. They want to get up every morning and give God his marching orders. I mean, it's really funny. A doer just wades out into the feedlot up to his waist in manure every morning, gets his cup of coffee, takes a deep breath, and says it's going to be a great day. The thinker walks around and they go, "I stepped on something this morning. I can still smell it. I know I can't see it. Is it on your shoe?" You want to relate differently to different people. Now, when it comes to energy levels, and I'll just mention this, we move on. Energy levels are different in all these people. A thinker's energy level is highest in the morning, dribbles off to nothing at night. So they're exhausted. And if you're a real high thinker, I would suggest that you take lunch by yourself. And it's really difficult if you're a father and a thinker because people drain your energy. And when you come home, you don't want anyone around you. And you just like to sit in front of the TV as a sedative and not budge. Now, as a thinker, it's very difficult. And that's why I want to emphasize the difference in personality. You've got to consider that your job isn't over until you've spent some time with the wife and spent individual time with the kids. Until you've done that, your job's not over. Now, I recognize that that's harder for you than it is any other personality because you're physically exhausted. The feeler's temperament starts low and ends high. They don't want to get out of bed, but they're rolling at midnight. Now, thinkers and feelers marry each other. And look at what happens. The only time in the day they usually can talk is in the morning or the evening, when one's up or the other's down. And that's why it's really important to have a day away with your mate. Betty and I still do this. We've done it ever since we were married. But every Saturday morning that I'm in town, since we've been married, is our time together. We used to get the kids donuts and say, Saturday morning you stay downstairs, don't bother us, we don't want to hear from you. We're going to stay upstairs and we drink coffee and talk and share. And if you're married to a thinker and you want to ask them questions and really have some good dialogue on Saturday morning, tell them on Monday what you want to talk about, so they can have all week to obsess on it. And at the end of the week, they'll give you some tremendous answers because they've had time to think about it. They don't like things thrown on them. Because what a feeler will do to them is ask this question, and the thinker will think, well, if that happens, then this might happen, then this, then this. Well, what if that happened or this? And then by then, the feeler's already asked them another question. And pretty soon, they just shut down. And so it takes a little more time for the thinker to come to the place where they'll communicate with you. A doer's energy level goes like this. They get up going full speed, and then they just fall into bed. If you've got a kid that's a doer, I can visit you at your house, and I can promise you there's footprints on the ceiling, and no one knows how they ever got there. A thinker, and it's different how you relate to kids. A thinker wants to know the rules. And I'll tell you what, they're the spiritual patrolman of your whole house. They want to know if you broke any of the rules. And if you told them in the year 2000 you're going to stand in the front yard on your head naked, you better do it. They'll remember it. They like the standards and they like them to be kept. Now, thinkers spiral into depression because they make lists for themselves that nobody can keep. And they have higher standards for themselves than God actually has for them. So they never arrive and they never achieve. They're just higher than God's. And that's one of the things that thinkers really got to be careful with. That'll make them depressed because they didn't meet the standards that they set. Not that God set them, but they set them. A feeler will adapt the morality of the crowd. Again, that's a positive thing. Paul said, I became all things to all men. But if you have a child that's a feeler, you just watch. When they're around spiritual kids, they go spiritual. When they're around carnal, they go carnal. Because they'll adapt that morality. It needs to be under the influence of the Spirit so it can be used of the Spirit. Then you've got the doers. And they love rules, but for a different reason. To drive you mad breaking them. So you've got to broaden this for them. If you've got a kid that's a doer and you tell them to be home by midnight, that's the rule. They'll be in at 12:59. Because 12:59 is midnight. Anything after midnight's midnight if it's not 1. I made it before 1. And they just love to challenge that all the time. So the thing is, if you want them in at midnight, you say come in at 11. And you have to choose the things that you'll fight with over the kid that's the doer. And exactly which those will be, you'll be the ones to choose it.